Hello and welcome to Landscape Photography World, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show discussing the wonderful world of landscape photography. This time I'll be talking to Glenn Crouch of Aegir Photography about his photography journey. Glenn is based in Sydney, Australia and has been taking photos in some shape or form for most of his life. You'll find him shooting most weekends at Sydney's many seascaping locations depending on the weather conditions. We discuss where he got started, his passion for seascaping, printing his work, and how his planning using weather apps helps him decide where and when to shoot, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi Glenn, welcome to Landscape Photography World. How are you going?
Good mate, yourself?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Pretty chipper.
No worries. Well, thanks for having me on, mate. It's
absolute pleasure.
I've been listening to the last few episodes you've punched out. It's great to see someone producing some content on a regular schedule in our part of the world. So yeah.
Yeah, just trying to keep myself busy while I can't shoot. So really an activity to replace my photography at the moment.
Yeah, I think you're certainly not alone in that, being in that situation. It's it's been a struggle.
Anyway, we won't talk about that. I'm sick of talking about the.
I can imagine
the lockdown and so forth. So
yeah.
Where did you start with photography and landscape photography in particular?
Oh, gee, well, I've had a camera in my hand since I was fairly young, actually. It really goes back to my mother. My mum was quite a keen photographer, just not so much artistic, but she was just a recorder of memories.
Yep.
And so I think I was probably about 8 or 9 when I was given my first camera, just a little, the old Instamatic point and shoot film cameras, just had the little canister in the back and all the rest of it. And I just remember, getting that first roll of film developed and, which probably took me 2 months to actually fill, and taking it to the chemists and waiting for it to be developed. And
you were really selective with your shots there.
Oh, yeah. I remember opening up that paper envelope, and it just felt like such magic to me to suddenly seeing all this stuff that you've recorded. So that was it for me. I don't think I've ever not owned a camera of some shape or form since then. And certainly landscape photography came into my life about 14, 15 years ago, I suppose. Probably during the transition to digital. I still had a film camera, which was kind of a little just another point and shoot, which I had, and then digital was sort of starting to grow. This is probably at the point when there were, I think, 3 or 4 megapixel cameras were out at the time. Yep. And decided I wanted to take the leap, and bought myself one of the Fuji bridging cameras. So not quite an SLR, but not quite a point and shoot. It was kind of those mid-range ones. But I remember I was living in Woolloomooloo at the time in an apartment complex, and I remember going up to the roof one night with this new digital camera of mine and a very shonky $5 cheapo tripod that I had, setting it up in the middle of the night and taking a photo of the city skyline. But then taking it back downstairs, putting it onto the computer and seeing it straight away. And that was it. I was hooked. Kind of, I've dabbled in multiple genres. I've done a bit of portraiture, and I still do macro, and but I'm originally from WA, and I grew up on the coast, so seascapes were always going to be my thing. I love the ocean. I love being around the ocean, and I'm lucky in that I'm an early riser by nature, so sunrises don't present any sort of challenge to me. I'm normally up, naturally awake at 5 o'clock in the morning anyway. So once I got my first SLR, which was a Nikon D80, just got involved with a couple of camera clubs and got invited out on a couple of shoots on the northern beaches, and that was it. I was hooked, addicted, and have not stopped ever since. Just been shooting consistently since then. So yeah.
Well, you're certainly known for your seascapes and cityscapes. What is it about the seascape that grabs you and made you fall in love with it?
Oh, look, I think it's photography for me it's become quite. My favourite part of any shoot, particularly sunrise shoots on the ocean, is without fail, every shoot I do, there is always that moment where it's just about being present and just enjoying the moment, regardless of the conditions. I love that just sort of meditative aspect of it. Just, standing there, you're either, you're knee deep in a 4 meter swell, or, that's an absolute color bomb just reflecting off the water. Like that's it for me. That's just what I absolutely adore. And I just get so much pleasure and joy out of that. So whether I'm by myself or with 20 other togs standing in line somewhere, but yeah, that's what makes it for me is that core component of just getting out that time in the morning when so many people are still asleep, and you're out there just enjoying the conditions. So yeah, that's the big thing for me.
Yeah, no, it's exactly what I love about it is, as you say, that presence of you've taken the time for yourself. You're in that moment. Whether you got sand between your toes or you're standing on a rock shelf knee deep in swell, as you said. It's a pretty good feeling. I don't think there's anything that comes near it.
No, totally agree.
Yeah. So when was the last time you got out to shoot, and where did you go? I know it's probably a dim memory.
I actually I did cheat a bit, and I actually took some notes today because I'm fairly familiar with a couple of the questions that you ask, and I can tell you exactly the last time I went out for a shoot, which was the 23rd of June. So yeah, that's how sad that is. And that was actually just down on the harbour shooting the Opera House, and I got an absolute colour bomb. So yeah, I was checking that today. I thought, God, how long ago was it? And went back through my archive, and then I started almost weeping looking at the sky that I got that morning and how many of those skies I've missed since. So, but yeah, so it's been a while. It's been a minute. So obviously for obvious reasons.
Yeah. Whereabouts was it?
Oh, it's shooting the Opera House. So I was down
Opera House. Okay. Sorry. I missed that bit. But
yeah. So I was just doing the lazy thing. It's the privilege I have that I do live relatively close to the harbour. So when I'm not feeling particularly motivated to drive anywhere, I've got the luxury of being able to just drive across the bridge or just down to Kirribilli or something like that, and getting a dawn there. So I'm a bit bloody spoiled, and I'm well aware of it. But,
yeah. So do you think where you live influences how you shoot in a big way, or not very much?
Not really. I certainly take advantage of it in that I'm kind of in the Wollstonecraft area, so I'm quite central.
Yeah.
But I used to live out in Castle Hill, so
okay, yeah. So I'm a little bit further out than that again.
Yeah, a bit further out, but that never deterred me. Once I got into seascaping in particular, I probably the first couple of years that I was shooting, I shot pretty much every location in the Sydney Basin. So I was not deterred by, getting up at, 3 o'clock in the morning and driving 2 hours down the coast or something like that from the Hills District. So, no, it's never really influenced me in that regard. It's if I'm keen for a shoot and I'm keen for a location, I'll get up whenever and go. So, yeah.
But I mean, travelling around doesn't bother you either. I mean, it's not all about Sydney and the local beaches, is it?
Absolutely not. No, I've been known to get up at ridiculous hours and go down to Kiama or further south and up to Newcastle or way out west. So you got to be in it to win it, and you only miss, the shots that you don't take. So
that's exactly it. Yeah, you've got to be out there. So what's the furthest what's the furthest you've done for a sort of a single shoot? Not one where you've planned to go out for a holiday or flown overseas, obviously, but just taken off from home first thing in the morning at ridiculous o'clock.
Yeah, I think the furthest would be a south shoot. I think Newcastle's definitely, or just south of Newcastle, I think is the furthest I've driven.
Yeah.
North. But down south, I've driven way past like south of Kiama, down that way along the coast there. Haven't quite made the Sapphire Coast yet. It's been on my list for many years, but I just haven't managed to get down there yet. But I think the earliest I've gotten up was probably around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning to get in the car and drive. So
that's not getting much sleep.
No. I think I'm kind of, I was kind of conditioned for it though. I spent 20 years in the military and I did a lot of shift work.
Yep.
So I think my body's just, obviously the older I get, the harder it is. But getting up at odd hours and just having to suddenly switch on and activate and operate and do stuff, it's kind of second nature. So that doesn't impact me on that great deal. Mind you, I'm not saying when I get back I don't have a little nana nap in the afternoon or something
I've done that in the morning. I've got back from the shoot at like 9 in the morning because I've been out from about 2 or 3 in the morning, and 9 in the morning snoring away on the lounge.
Yeah. Recovery is very important.
Absolutely. So what are you trying to express, I guess, through your photography? What is it that you're getting out of it, or what is it that you're trying to give to other people?
Oh, look, this is a really interesting question. I don't think I've ever truly adequately answered that question. But over the last few years, I've learnt what my images mean to other people, in that I've participated in exhibitions and things like in my area here, we have an arts trail, which I've participated in the last 3 years. And I enjoy, I'm a long exposure shooter. It was the very first camera technique I ever learnt. And I think over the years, I've kept doing it simply because I think as technology progresses, it's one of the last, I think, camera techniques that you can't replicate adequately with a phone. So I kind of now divide up my work between what I call record shots. So, something that's handheld at a really fast shutter speed. That's, if you put that next to taking the same photo with a phone, there would be no difference on the screen. Like, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But obviously, if you do something that's 30 seconds long, well, yes, you can technically replicate that with a phone, but not with a single click of the button. So definitely. I'm sort of into creating, particularly with Seascapes. I love simple images that capture flow and energy, and I love big, angry, stormy skies, and big swells, things like that. And what I've found over the years, talking to people that are standing there looking at my work, and God forbid, actually purchase something. It's interesting to see their reactions. And I think it's something that, as landscape photographers, I think we tend to undersell and perhaps underappreciate sometimes, is that, particularly if you've been shooting for a while and you build a bit of an archive of images and things like that, you tend to forget just how rare some of these conditions actually are.
Oh, yeah.
And last year I sold a print to a lady, and it was one of my foggy bridge shots, when there's been really uber thick fog on the harbour, and, you can basically only see, a quarter of the bridge in the image. And when I explained to her just how rarely that actually happens in Sydney, We get fog and we get mist and stuff like that. For the harbour to be really socked in, a real pea super where you can barely see anything, it's quite rare.
It happens, so but it might happen a couple of times a year. If you're lucky. Yeah,
exactly right. And when I explained that to her, I think it may have motivated her to actually buy it, because she was standing there holding it in her hands and she was obviously tossing it up. And then I told her the story of how I actually captured the image. And it was a morning I was actually woken up. It was just a few years ago, but I was woken up by the foghorn of a cruise liner that was coming in the harbour. So I woken up to this weird noise and I thought, what the hell is that? And then, brain kicks into gear and I realized that it was a ship's horn. So, of course, I opened up the curtains and looked out the window and I couldn't see anything. And then ran to the computer and booted up and looked at the Sydney Harbour webcam, and I couldn't see anything on that. And that was it. I was like, grabbed the camera, jumped in the car, flew down to Kirribilli and ran around like a madman for about an hour, taking various angles and stuff like that. So I think it's just about capturing that moment. But I think what's been most rewarding for me is having those conversations with people and connecting with people that are actually viewing your work. I just think that's kind of the ultimate thing, really. It's the ultimate feedback. It trumps any sort of digital viewer, feedback that you might get. I think that nothing beats that face-to-face discussion and conversations and hearing stories from people about how they connect to your work. So,
yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I know. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day, actually, and one of the things that we were talking about is that, and I think a lot of people, particularly, people that don't get up early and take photos like we do, or, go out when the fog's out, they look out the window, see it's foggy and go back, pull the covers over their head and go back to sleep. But, aside from those rare moments, they don't realise when they look at the photos that a photographer puts out, these are the highlights. And
absolutely,
they're also the edited highlights, because they're only selected 2, maybe 3. If you're really lucky, you'll get 6 banging images that you're prepared to put out in the public, out of maybe you might shoot 500 shots in the morning, shoot and flow or something, and all you're showing them is the absolute edited highlight. So that might have been an absolutely fabulous day, fabulous morning, but you're getting this little slice of it, and that's it.
Absolutely. And I raised this point last year during my local arts trail. So that the arts trail in my area, it's the suburb I'm in has quite an artistic community. There's a lot of painters and sculptors and things like that. And they've been running this arts trail for a few years now. And it's literally I set up a mini gallery in my carport. So I get some prints out, I hang them up, and I'll put some smaller prints out. But what I've been doing every year is I do my own personal project every year, which is a review, a photo book for the previous year. And I put that book out for people just to flick through, just to see, because it's quite a good, obviously, just a review of the previous year. And at the front of every annual that I do, I list the number of sunrises that I shot in that year. And so the 2019 year, I shot 106 sunrises.
That's a pretty good average,
Yeah, which is that's pretty much my average generally. And I had this lady who was reading through my book, and she went, "How on earth do you get up and shoot 106 sunrises?" And she was quite astounded. And then she was flicking through the book, and she said to me, I'm not sure there's 106 sunrise images in here. And I said, well, you're not seeing the crap ones. You're
That's
seeing
right. The ones that I got up, I did shoot, but I didn't think were worthy enough to print or put in a book.
That's exactly right.
That's it.
You're not seeing the crappy stuff that just doesn't make the cut. So absolutely, it's a very curated, sort of slice that you're seeing. Definitely.
Well, I think that's generally what most people are putting out there is obviously they're not going to. Well, that said, I have seen some interesting stuff posted online as well that you kind of go, really? Okay.
Yeah.
And not wanting to disparage anyone's artistic, interpretation of something, but you kind of look at some of them and go, okay. But most people are really out there to, just showcase their best and the best of their best. They're not out there to show. They're not out there to show you the blooper reel. I mean, some people might show a bit of the blooper reel as a, in a story as a bit of a joke or something. But
absolutely,
it's very much a curated view of the world, I think. And that,
definitely.
And that it's one thing that I wanted to touch on with you. Is one of the I think. It's not necessarily a massive negative, but it can be a negative for some people. And again, I've spoken to a few people about this, but the impact of that edited highlights reel that people see whilst living their own blooper reel, can really have a negative effect on some people with social media in particular. And
absolutely. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I find myself, sometimes slipping into that headspace. You're scrolling across Instagram, and particularly when you follow a lot of overseas photographers, the Nick Pages and the European guys, and these are people that can get on a plane and be in the French Alps in an hour, and they're putting up work that it's breathtaking. But I have to remind myself, that's their backyard. That's like me driving down and shooting the Opera House.
And a lot of them will look at our shots of Sydney and the beaches and whatever and go, I wish I could do that. And they can't. Because they don't
absolutely.
Have the same sort of thing.
That's how I remind myself that,
exactly.
It's because it's very easy to get sucked into that trap of especially a lot of the big landscape photographers who, again, are obviously posting only their A-level stuff that from their archives and things like that. But you've got to remind yourself where they live and what they've got access to. And, like Nick Page can, get in his car and drive down the road and he's shooting, shelf clouds and storm bolts and stuff like that. Yeah. But it's like, okay. That's his backyard, but it's, that's just...
Mind you, we get some good storms in summer when we, when they're on, you get a nice shelf cloud over the Opera House or over the city or the Harbour Bridge, and it looks pretty spectacular too.
Absolutely, and
I still haven't got one of those.
I'm still chasing that image.
Yeah, I was going to say I've seen quite a few of them, but I still haven't got there for those sorts of things. Unfortunately, I'm usually at work when they roll through at like 3 or 4 in the afternoon.
Same here.
Which is typically when they hit. So
look, it took me probably about 6 years to get my very first shelf cloud in Sydney, and it was the most bizarre, unusual thing because normally shelf clouds in Sydney sort of come up from the south, whereas this thing, it was monstrous, and it was pure luck. I just happened to look at the radar because it was a grey day. And this shelf cloud, it was kilometers long, and it was so long that's how it showed up on the radar. I had this line, but it came in from the northwest. So
that's unusual here.
Bizarre, absolutely bizarre. And I was lucky enough to be able to get home, get in the car, drive down to the harbour, and I managed to get quite a few frames of it as it came over Cockatoo Island and stuff like that. So it's the only one I've managed to catch, but I don't have any of the southerly ones yet. So, it's on the list. But it's one of those things.
Yeah. So do you find yourself now getting more picky in taking your shots when you're out there? I mean, I depending on where I am and what I'm doing, I can certainly come away with easily 400 or 500 exposures. With the way that I shoot, you're probably lucky to see. I'd only look at a tenth of them anyway because I'm bracketing. So if I'm taking 5 exposures at a time, I'm only looking at the center one to see, okay, have I nailed the composition?
Yeah.
And is the lighting kind of what I want? And then and then picking the one or two out of that. But do you find yourself being more picky and so forth with conditions, or do you just shoot whatever's there?
I've always been a fairly fussy shooter, primarily when it comes to conditions, and simply because when I first started shooting and I started shooting sunrises, I got up every weekend and went out regardless.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't matter what it was, time of the year, conditions, anything. I just got up and went. I just went out and shot.
Yeah.
And I think it was probably after the first 18 months, 2 years, and I started going back and reviewing stuff, and I realized just how much crap there was.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, there's got to be a better way of doing this. There's got to be a smarter way of doing this. And at the time, I knew very little about, weather forecasting and what was actually available to sort of aid you in that regard. And that started my going down the rabbit hole of, cloud forecasting and swell forecasting and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not a fan of clear skies. I know some people, embrace it and they love it, but if I look out the window and there's not a cloud in the sky, I'm going back to bed. It's just that simple. It's just not my thing. I hate clear skies. Sky replacement software was invented for people like me that just hate clear skies in an image. So yeah, look, but everything, if there's cloud of some shape or form, if it's reasonable, if there's reasonable coverage, my rule of thumb is, anything under 35% coverage, I tend to not go out for these days.
Yeah. Well,
So
so you're making that call even before you've got out of the house.
Yeah. I generally, over the years, I've had people message me and say, where are you shooting, this weekend? And they messaged me on a Monday, and I said, ask me again on Friday night, because that's generally when I make the call.
Ask me at 3:00 on Saturday morning.
Yeah, exactly right.
So, funnily enough, that's usually when I decide where I'm going to shoot. And it's partly looking at the apps, but it's also just sometimes, okay, well, I know conditions are going to be good. I'm spoilt for choice. Which one do I want to do today? Because when you can see you got 80 to 90% high cloud cover in the forecast, and you poke your head out the window and you go, I can see that cirrus and streaky cloud, and I know there's going to be a burn. Then it doesn't really matter where I go. It's just about picking the right place, And to be honest, a lot of that comes from, okay, what time of year is it? What direction's the sun going to therefore come up? Is it going to come up, high in the north or lower down in the south in summer? And so then I start thinking about, okay, well, that's where that's because you kind of have an idea about some of the comps. Some mornings though, it's okay, well, let's go somewhere I haven't been and do that, because
absolutely,
it's good skies and I haven't been there. So even if I struggle to find an actual comp the first time, at least I've got a nice sky behind it, and you can usually find something.
Absolutely. And one of the things that does drive my decision-making process is that I have a personal master list of locations, and I have a list of locations I've caught color bombs at. So if it's looking like it's going to be an absolute burner, I go to my list to see, okay, where have I actually caught one before and where haven't I? And that's actually what dictates where I go. So quite often, I very, very good friend of mine, Liz Bell, who's my regular shooting partner. We have this Friday sort of evening discussion, like, how's it looking tomorrow? Where do you want to go? What's your thinking? And she always asks me first now, because she knows full well I'm consulting a list as to what might be happening. And, if it's going to be a burner, all right, well, I know not to ask to go here or go there because we've already got one there. So, but most definitely. And again, going back to, talking to members of the public, is I've had this discussion many, many times with people who look at a particular image and just go, ooh, ah, wow, that's really pretty.
Yeah.
And I always say to them, like, would you like to know the story behind it? Because it gives them an appreciation that it's not just luck. There's so much planning and thinking that goes into the creation of a lot of these images. So
absolutely.
Yeah, when people hear like, well, if you're a cloud obsessive, like, by Thursday you start looking at what the long range forecast is, and then Friday evening you start looking at what cloud levels are going to be out there, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be low cloud. Okay, let's go to the swell forecast. What's the swell doing? What's the tide doing? Right? Where's the sun coming from? All these factors that create those conditions that you might be capturing. So yeah, it's interesting to hear. Like, people just don't, and I often think that this is one of the reasons I think photography sometimes struggles, in the art world, in the larger art world, is I don't think there's that much appreciation for just how much work goes into.
Don't you just turn up and push a button, and that's
exactly. Yeah. As the saying goes, F11 and turn up.
That's right.
Yeah, most definitely. So I find it fascinating having those conversations, because it just, try and give people a bit more of a larger appreciation of what they're looking at and what went into actually creating that image.
But even beyond the planning, when you get on site, there's, okay, you've got to work the composition and understand what it is that you're going to, what's my subject? What's my foreground? What am I, where is the sun? Am I looking for side light? Am I looking for straight into the sun, right down the barrel?
And for long exposure shooters, which way is the cloud traveling? What's that going to create in the images? Does that line up with the foreground or the subject?
Do I have leading lines or not? All those things come into, and the composition alone. I mean, I know myself, I can spend probably a good 20, 30 minutes before I actually line up the first comp, and that's just looking around the place. What's the foreground element? It's usually the first bit that I start at, and then what am I lining that up with to get me the shot,
Oh, look, most definitely, and I've been known to. I'm a bit of a wanderer when I get to locations, and so, for instance, take a spot like Bombay. So there's kind of one or two very classic compositions in that spot that pretty much everybody shoots.
Yeah.
So I remember the first time I went to Bombay, and unsurprisingly got very wet. But
everybody gets wet at Bombay.
Yeah, well, if you're not getting wet, you're not doing it properly at Bombay.
That's right. But seascaping in general.
Yeah, well, exactly. But I remember getting, the climbing up onto the ledge there and shooting north along those towers there and getting those impact shots and stuff like that. But, after about 15 minutes, I was thinking, well, what else is there? What else is around here?
Yeah.
And I just went for a wander, and obviously no one had told me about the North Channel. So, I went walking around the corner and went up to the other end of those basalt rock walls and found that Northern Channel. And I spent the rest of the morning there because I actually think that's a better composition than the other one. So yeah, I'm a bit of a wanderer. I'm the same. I tend to sort of scope it. If I've never been somewhere before, I tend to scope it out for a good 15, 20 minutes and see what catches my eye, and then I'll start chasing it. And I think particularly with sunrise shooting, you get there in the dark, so you've got limited vision as to what you can actually see, and then it's that sort of race against the light, before the light goes. So it's trying to find that comp, and look, I've had those mornings where you just can't find something that really jumps out at you, and you end up sort of just capturing sort of semi-mediocre compositions that it's all about either just getting a snapshot of the light or what the conditions were. And this is why I'm a repeat offender at just about every location I've been to. Like, I will go back there multiple times for that reason. I'm not sure if you've encountered photographers who have this mindset, but I have certainly had discussions with people who say, well, I don't go back there because I've shot it. And
I have encountered it, but I'm definitely not a believer in it. There's a few places where I've been really lucky, and the skies have but there was a shot I did, a shoot up at Newport, and it was just absolutely, there was red from horizon to above my head, and as far as the eye could see, and the reflections on the water were just absolutely fantastic. Stunning. The tide conditions were ideal. I probably won't shoot that for a while because
absolutely.
And it was literally the first time luckily the first time I'd ever shot down at Newport, down at the rock pool down there.
Oh, wow.
And occasionally, you luck out like that, and you kind of go, well, I doubt I'll see better than that. So, okay, I could probably work on the comps a little, or I could, I could get better flow maybe, but that sky is, and yes, I've played around with sky replacement, but it's not something I do a lot of, and it's certainly not something that I do with that.
Absolutely.
There are a few places though that I just keep going back to, because the one place that keeps eluding me at the moment is SS Airfield there in Homebush Bay. Which for the listeners that don't frequent Sydney, it's probably about a 80 to 90-year-old shipwreck, which has been beached in a little bay with a mangrove tree growing out of the top of it. And
it's pretty unique.
Yeah, fairly unique. But every time I go there, either there's a little tiny bit of pink way up in the north and nowhere near me, or I've got some nice streaky clouds because it was a windy, cloudy day one time that I went, but I just every other time it's either been absolute clear skies or just a nothing sunrise that didn't burn, and or sunset that didn't burn, and it's kind of like
I think every
I'm going to keep going back though.
I think every landscape photographer has one location like that. I think that's so true. I just think there's always one spot that no matter how many times you go to, it's just never good. It's crystal clear. Mine is Bengali Heads up in the northern beaches. Have you shot there before?
No, I haven't done that one yet. It's another on my list.
It's a bit of it's not for the faint of heart. It's a bit of a goat track to get down onto the shelf there. There's a fisherman's track which sort of meanders down the side of this cliff face. It's not, I wouldn't call it dangerous, but it's, you got to be sure-footed and be aware of where to go.
Slightly sketchy.
Every single time I have been there, it's been the wrong swell, there's been no cloud, or it's been a total grey out, or it's been pouring with rain. It's just, I have never been happy with any image I've created there. And there's a whole bunch, it's a fantastic shelf. It's got some great sort of runoff. There's a flat part where the swell comes in and stuff like that. So it's got so much potential, and I can see some great comps there, but I've never nailed anything there. I've been there probably half a dozen times. So it's and look,
they're the places you just have to keep going back to,
Absolutely. It's exactly right. It's just, it's on my list. It hasn't been crossed off my list yet. So,
I mean, it is one of the nice things about living where we do is that, there's, you are spoilt for choice. There's got to be, I don't know, how many beaches are there?
There are. I can tell you because I've actually, a while ago, I created 2 maps, which is basically these are just the pools in Sydney.
Yeah, the rock pools. I think there's about
so on the
70 of them.
On the northern beaches, just on the northern beaches, there are 14 rock pools on the northern beaches, and on the south side there are 15.
Okay.
So you've got just rock pools. I'm not even talking about rock shells or anything like that. That's just rock pools that we're talking about. So and Sydney's unique in Australia for that.
Yeah.
Let's see. So we're so spoilt for ease of access, locations. so I tend to get a little bit shirty at people in Sydney that complain about, oh, there's nowhere left to shoot.
Nowhere left to shoot. Yeah, there's plenty of, yeah.
What are you talking about?
And then you can go a little, and not that far further afield. You get down to Kurnell, you can go down to Gary, down,
Absolutely.
Even Bundeena. There's some really nice stuff I've seen around in Bundeena as well.
Shelley Beach at Bundeena is a beautiful little spot.
Absolutely.
So it does there's an entire Royal National Park to explore, all the coastline.
Well, there's waterfalls in there. There's waterfalls in what's his name? Terry Hills, for Christ's sake,
Yeah. I have no patience for any Sydney-based photographer who complains about not knowing where to go or just thinks everything's been shot. Seriously, that does my head in, that attitude. It's just you've got to be kidding me. Because if you go, if you go to Melbourne, if you go to Brisbane, if you go to Perth, even Adelaide, and Adelaide's like the city of jetties. There's just some fantastic ocean jetties in Adelaide. But you got to drive, to get out to some of the spots there. So there's just nowhere like Sydney. We're just so unbelievably spoilt here for choice. So
absolutely.
I adore it. I've shot every pool in Sydney, and I will keep shooting them because, I had this discussion a while ago with one of these infamous photographers who said, I don't go back there because I've shot it. And I said, well, every single day is different. Every single weather condition is different.
Every wave's different.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can't fathom that attitude.
I remember one particular morning, I was at Turrametta, and I think without moving my tripod more than probably 10 meters, I got about 15 different comps.
Yep.
And different waves, different lighting as the lighting changed and everything. And that was all in a 10-meter sort of area.
Yeah, exactly right. And
if you think about it and you look at what you're doing and you understand it, understand what the light's doing and understand what, if you're shooting flow or something like that, understand what the waves are up to, what is the tide going out, coming in, all that sort of thing. You can just get endless entertainment out of it because it is entertainment for me.
Totally. And Turrametta is a great example because it's kind of, it's one of the seascape meccas of Sydney.
Yeah.
It's an absolute classic location. And, over the years when I first started shooting, it was one of the very first locations I ever shot sunrise at. So it holds a special place in my heart. But, over the years, I've heard people sort of roll their eyes and go, well, I'm not going to Turry on a Saturday morning because there'll be 25 other photographers there. And that may well be true.
Yeah.
But if you can't find a comp at Turry, even with that many photographers there, you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
I've been there on a Saturday morning and I counted 26 photographers just on the southern end. Yeah. And all I did was I packed up my tripod and I walked up to the northern end of the beach there and shot the shelf there, and I was by myself. So I mean,
that's exactly it.
Yeah. So it's just we're just so unbelievably privileged to have access to locations like this. If you look at you chat to people that live in Melbourne, especially in the sort of inner city area, it's a fair hike for them to get to locations.
Pier. There's a few places there, but other than you see it is the mecca for cityscapes and for street photographers. Some of the street graffiti and all that sort of thing. The lane,
Hosier Lane and things like that. They're amazing.
It is brilliant for those sorts of things. But I mean, you're not going to get flow in Port Phillip Bay very much. You might on a really stormy day.
Yeah, no, it's not known for its seascapes. So
down to Mornington or around to the
that's
Great
exactly
Ocean
right.
Road, I think otherwise, but
to Cape Schanck or something like that. So so we're very spoiled. We're very, very lucky, and truly.
So we all have our inspirational and aspirational photographers. Who's your go-to when you are seeking to extend yourself or ask for advice?
I don't really have any sort of singular names that pop to mind. I mean, I obviously follow a lot of the bigger names on Instagram and stuff like that. But I tend to, I don't know, I tend to view other people's work now, not so much with a critical eye anymore. I certainly used to. But these days, it's to me, and I think this is a symptom of social media and endlessly scrolling. It's kind of about what just jumps out at you and catches your eye these days, because we consume so much imagery now. It's quite just mind-boggling. So, I tend to do a lot of scrolling, in the morning and the evening, and sort of I'll stop at something that really jumps out at me. And I have to say, I tend to find that a bit of a negative thing. I think, we've become so sort of desensitized to really good imagery, really good landscape photography, because there's a lot of it
about.
Yeah. So, and I think, we tend to forget quite often within our world, within the landscape photography world, we do see so much of it that I think this is one of the wonderful things about sort of showing your work, in hard copy form to what I call the unsuspecting public, people that don't look at it every day.
Yeah, and then they're not doom scrolling like you and I might.
That's exactly right.
Most of my scrolling these days is looking for people to tap on the shoulder and ask to be a guest. This stuff looks
most
good
definitely. Yeah. So I think it's a good reminder that, we've sort of become a bit blasé about, stunning skies and flow and landscapes. And I think it's good to be reminded every now and then that not everybody looks at it through our eyes. So for the average punter, we do create quite amazing imagery that most people just don't see. So,
I think both in the shooting and the processing, a lot of what goes into it is invisible to somebody who, I mean, you might look at an image and go, oh yeah, they've probably used a radial gradient or something there to, get the light in that spot highlighted.
Yep.
Maybe they have or they haven't, who knows,
Yeah.
But the trick is doing it in such a way that nobody knows what you've done unless you've actually got years of experience of looking at it, and I think there's a lot of joy. I mean, I know just in sort of sharing some of my work with both the family but also other people, they do get, I get blown away, about their reactions to, oh wow, how did you do that, and that's when you've got to go, okay, well, I just turned up and pressed the button,
That's so true, though. It is so true, and again, some of the conversations I've had with the public and I think one of the most painful experiences we have as landscape photographers is having the inevitable Photoshop question.
Did you edit that image? Yes, of course I did.
Did you Photoshop this? Yeah. And it's like, it's such a loaded question, and there's so many insinuations behind it. And so I've started during the arts trial in particular, I have a little sort of artist statement, at the front of my driveway, which is just a little blurb about me. But I've now made a point of putting into it that I say, yes, the images you're looking at have been processed in Photoshop, which is merely the digital equivalent of the darkroom in the film days. And that seems to satisfy people.
Yeah,
I think
once you explain it in those sorts of terms, it usually clicks. Oh, okay, it's not, it's not been a sky replacement, or I've added some birds or some clouds, or the various brushes that you can buy now that do all of those.
And I think. Absolutely. And I think the problem is that Photoshop's kind of entered the lexicon as sort of a word for trickery. Yeah. So people have that feeling that maybe they're being deceived by what they're looking at.
You're somehow trying to trick my eye into thinking you're a better photographer than you really are,
Absolutely.
And I dare say there are people out there that do that. I prefer, and I was talking to somebody the other day about this. I prefer those that are upfront and honest. And if I've if I've messed around with an image, and even if it might not be obvious to the layperson, I'm going to say it's a composite, or this is this is multiple different exposures composed together to give you this result, or I've added that set of birds, which I've never done. I've added that set of birds in the corner, to make it look better.
Yeah, and this is where I land on the whole debate about sky replacements and composites and things like that. I think as long as you're upfront about it, consider your audience, who you're showing it to. But I think even amongst photographers, I think there's a bit of integrity involved with, if you've swapped out the sky, or, it's even when it's obvious, like if it's clearly, it's a short shutter speed for the flow, but it's a long exposure for the sky or something like that. I think it just shows a bit of integrity if you actually just put a comment, in the post or whatever to say, yep, this is a composite that I created, or, this was the foreground's mine, but the sky above it is, somebody else's or whatever. I think at the end of the day, if you're honest about it, if you're upfront about it, I really don't care what people do. Yeah, and I think most people only get their back up when they feel like they've been deceived, where they find out after the fact that it's...
If someone's trying to pass it off as journalism, that's where I think the line... If it's art, it's art. And in art, literally, you can do what you like. There are no rules in art. But as soon as you say, okay, well, this is journalism now, and I'm putting this out there as a realistic explanation or story of what happened, and you've played with it, then that's where things, I think, have crossed the line. But I mean, these arguments have been going on since almost the dawn of photography. Talking to Colby Brown, on another episode about Frank Hurley and the controversy about his World War I images, where he was doing composites.
Well and truly.
And he was doing it with glass plates and
absolutely. And look, within the landscape space, I always revert back to Ansel Adams. Like, you look at his work, but then you looked at the post-processing that was done in the darkroom for his images. They weren't straight out of camera. No. So that ship has well and truly sailed, as far as I'm concerned.
No, totally.
Well and truly.
It's funny though. I mean, it keeps coming up as a topic, I think, in lots of photography forums. You see these conversations, and it sometimes stems from that, somewhat not so innocent question of, have you used Photoshop? Well, yes, I use Photoshop on all my images, simply because to get from raw to the finished image, I could use GIMP, I could use other processing tools, but I'd still be using a processing tool to get me there.
Most definitely. And look, I've had conversations over the years with people who, there are the, I guess what you would call purists that talk about, I only shoot straight out of camera. And I always say to people, well, that may be true, but you realize that the camera's already editing the image. Yeah. So, I know what you think, you just press the button and that was it. But in the seconds that image was created, it's adjusted contrast and color. And
exactly.
So it's not like a raw file, which is completely flat and blank. It's a blank canvas.
It's not like a film negative, where
absolutely.
There's very, very little that the camera's going to do to it to change it, other than let the light in,
Yeah.
But even then,
I just think
you can add a filter, you can put your hand out, on a long exposure, you can put your hand over the top half of the lens for, a few seconds and then move it. And there's all sorts of other tricks that you can do.
I think this debate's kind of, and particularly in this day and age, the second that Instagram was created and Instagram decided to put its own filters, as part of the app, I mean, as I said, that ship has sailed. So I find it hilarious that you see people like Instagrammers complaining about over-processed images. And it's like, what do you think you're doing on the app? You know,
That's
you're
it,
taking a photo with your phone and then pressing a couple of buttons to apply a filter. What do you think that is? So, yeah, I think these days the technology's just progressed so far. This is all mute. This is all just a mute point, really. And I think a lot of the time, these photography forums, it's kind of like the tabloid media. It's just a great driver of clicks and outrage onto their comment sections these days. You know, I don't even read them anymore. It's just pointless.
Yeah, no.
So,
yeah, no,
yeah.
It's an interesting debate sometimes, but yeah, sometimes you just kind of get over it. So almost as bad as the question, you know, what camera did you use?
Well, I that's right up there with, personally speaking, I rate that right up there with the, you know, what were the camera settings for this particular image?
Yeah.
Even when I was learning with my first SLR, it was a question I never asked, because I understood very early on that it's a moment in time and settings are irrelevant, because what are you trying to do? Are you trying to replicate exactly what they just captured?
That's exactly it. I mean, Astro, yes, there's some formulas that you can work out with your triangle where the settings matter.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Other than that, you know, for shooting flow, okay, well, what gets you a quarter of a second exposure time?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
That could be twiddling other dials to make that happen, you know?
Yeah. And look, I'm sure you've been asked the question over the years.
Oh, yeah, I've started saying I used a Nokia 3310.
But it goes to the camera question, you know, like people looking at your work and people that might be interested in getting into photography. And the first question they ask you is, what do you shoot with? You know, what brand do you use? And I'm a Nikon shooter personally, but the only reason I'm a Nikon shooter is because I walked into a camera store, I picked up a Canon and I picked up a Nikon, and the Nikon felt better in my hand. That was my decision-making process.
I was similar. I was in duty free in an airport, and they only had Canon and Nikon DSLRs. They might have had an Olympus one, I think, but they only had one. And it was, okay, price, what does this do? What does that do? Video, yada, yada, you know, just went through sort of a list of requirements and ended up with a Canon because price and everything else weighed up that, okay, it's slightly better for me right now to buy that Canon.
Absolutely.
And then you buy lenses for it, and that means you then have a bit of a lock-in with the
now you're locked into the system.
Unless you're going to sell it all and, you know, on the second-hand market, you know, I know I've bought a few lenses on the second-hand market, you know.
So have I.
Not a bad way of getting a cheap lens, but I don't know that I'll buy a body that way, but
look, I think it's, again, I think camera technology is at a point now where whatever brand is on the outside of your camera is completely irrelevant. You know, it's just what you're comfortable with.
Don't Sony make all of the sensors anyway now?
Well, pretty much, yeah. So I mean, it doesn't really matter. You know, it's the person standing behind the viewfinder that's the most important component of the process these days.
Yeah.
So
the gear, the settings, etc., are absolutely no replacement for creativity. And,
absolutely.
You know, it's got to be what you're seeing, what you're feeling, what you want to make out of it. You know, and you see incredible images, you know, both inside landscape as well as outside, which, you know, blow my mind when you look at them, because you go, I would never have thought to do that, you know.
Yeah. Oh, well and truly.
Yeah. I look at that and I go, I really admire somebody seeing that shot, because I would have walked straight past it and ignored it and not seen it, simply because my creative thinking doesn't lend me towards looking for those sorts of things. But that other person has done that, and that to me is where the difference really gets made. Yeah,
most definitely. I'm a big fan of street photographers.
Yep.
It's not a genre I've explored terribly well, but I'm in awe of these guys that get out there amongst people and manage to capture, scenes that have unbelievable lighting, and they've just managed to snap somebody in a second of time, in a particular pose, or it's the way the shadow falls across them or something. It blows my mind that people just in a second, in an instant, can just see that and capture it. The landscape photography is quite slow photography. You build that sort of time frame where you're able to generate something in your head and create something, whereas street photographers have really got to literally think on their feet and generate something. So it blows me away. Good street photography is just, I'm in awe of.
Definitely. So what's the most notable experience you've had taking a shot or on a shoot?
That's a very easy question to answer. 2019 on Diamond Beach in Iceland.
Nice. Yeah.
So 2019 was the year of my 50th birthday, and I managed to slowly convince my better half and Minister of Finance to allow me to do a photography tour to Iceland and Norway. And I had been obsessed with Diamond Beach from the very first time I saw an image of it. Here in Australia, we're so used to just blue seas, yellow sand, blue skies.
Yeah.
So to try and wrap my head around glacial ice sitting on black sand with a
grey or white sea, depending on.
Yeah, exactly right. So in 2019, I did a tour to Iceland with Jared Costain, who's a Sydney photographer, and he runs tours there. And just getting out of the van in the car park and looking down onto that beach and getting down there, in like 6 layers of clothing and gum boots. And it's managing to capture some pleasing images and capturing the color in that ice just will stay with me forever. And it wasn't completely uneventful. I did manage to cop a face full of seawater and black sand, because it's a pretty dicey spot. It's a sheer slope. When the waves roll into that beach, it's at quite an acute angle. So it's one of those beaches where the swell's quite deceiving. It doesn't look that big, but then you realize that because it's such a slope, it generates so much energy as it impacts. So the speed of the water coming up, and I got caught where I target fixation. I was so fixated on this particular chunk of ice in front of me. And I realized at the last second that this wave was going to come over the top of that ice. So I had just enough time to throw the tripod behind me to protect the camera, but I was still looking forward. So boom, straight into the face.
Oh, nice.
So I was well and truly awake at that point in time because it was Icelandic seawater. But look, I've never been happier on a seascape shoot. It was just breathtaking. There was just chunks of ice absolutely everywhere. It's moving, it's melting. The bigger stuff sort of landed off the top of the beach, but all the small stuff's rolling in the ocean. So it's not you had to shoot quite short shutter speeds, because if you left it too long, it was blurred. So you really had to think on your feet. You had to adjust your settings to the conditions, all that sort of stuff, and then keep one eye on the swell, obviously, that as it was impacting, and just look for those beautiful chunks of ice. So that's well and truly a highlight.
Yeah, fantastic. What about horror stories?
Oh, we've all got them.
That's why I asked the question. I like to hear them.
Yeah, I think the worst shoot I've been on, I was actually by myself. Probably the diciest situation I've been in. So one of the very first times I went down to Cape Banks, down near La Perouse. So down there, I know it well. I've shot down there a few times.
I love it, but you've got to be careful, particularly when you're scrabbling around the rocks in the dark.
Yeah, which is exactly what I was doing, and I was down on the lower shelf. So there's a tiny little outcropping there where it's got a fisherman's pole jammed on the very edge of it.
Yep.
But that's what I was chasing. So high tide, reasonably sized swell, and it was still dark. It's pre-dawn, and I was down there. So I'm down there by myself. I've got rock boots on. I'm all kitted out, and I've climbed down, and I'm sort of there's a tiny little ledge that's just slightly above that landing there, where there's a couple of big rocks. So I hadn't set up. So his backpack's still on my back. I've got the tripod in my hand, and I'm looking around thinking, righto, let's just scope this out. And it's just as well I was standing where I was, because it was that row wave that started rolling in. Yeah. And it's big when you can hear it before you can see it.
Yeah, it sounds like a train coming. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So I knew I had nowhere to go. So I literally just stood there. I backed up against the edge of the rock wall there, and I just braced for impact. I got absolutely drenched. It basically went up to my neck. There was so much water rolling over that point. But obviously, because I had rock boots on, I didn't slip. I had grip. So I just basically waited for it to roll back. And then I did the walk of shame back to the car, where I was just literally dripping, and it was winter. So it was absolutely freezing cold.
Even better.
So, but I had to do the walk of shame back up that track, and I was walking past these fishos that were walking down with their fishing rods, and there's still water dripping off me.
They had a bloody good laugh, I'll bet.
Absolutely. So yeah, it was one of those life lessons. Like, next time, how about just taking a bit more time and not rushing down. And so, but that very same spot, I've also been down there, and I've pulled someone off that rock shelf who was at very great risk of being washed into the swell there. So I was down there with a mate of mine, and shooting away, and this fisho came down carrying all his gear, and I knew he was in trouble because I looked at his feet, because it's what I always do when I see people on rock shelves, and he was wearing Crocs. So
nice. That's stylish, but
Japanese safety boots, as I call them. But he was literally walking out to that.
Not very safe.
No, and he was walking out to that point, and as he was doing it, was just when the set came in, and he got absolutely knocked on his rear end, and so we had to scramble down and basically grab hold of him, because we were worried he was going to get sucked in. So
I've got to say, the funniest footwear I've seen on a rock fisherman is a pair of rubber thongs, or flip-flops for the international listeners, with beer bottles tacked to the bottom. I don't know exactly how he'd done it, but he'd obviously pierced through the rubber sole of the thing, and he had like half a dozen beer bottles on each foot. Beer bottle tops, the little crown seals. And It was like, you've got to be kidding.
Yeah. That's
he thought that was safe, because he had
the quintessential example of it. It seemed like a good idea at the time. But
I think he must have made those after drinking the beers. But
yeah. You didn't want to throw the bottles out. So
no, that's right.
I got a good idea. Far out. It never ceases to amaze me what you see, shooting seascapes. And obviously we share these coastlines with a lot of fishermen, and I'm continuously blown away. You see the entire gamut of people with all the gear on, fully kitted out, and all the rest of it, right down to examples like that of just blokes turning up in thongs. And you just think, well, there's little wonder that so many of you people die every year.
Yes, absolutely.
Just incredible. So, I consistently say to people, I'm a bit evangelical about it, really. But if you're going to get out there, like, you're carrying, several $1,000s worth of camera gear on your back, and
if you've got a couple of $100 worth of fishing gear,
yeah, but you don't want to spend $60 on a pair of rock boots.
That's right.
I don't get that thinking at all. But it's to their own.
Yeah. And I mean, even if you don't go that far and get the rock boots themselves, you can buy a set of cleats for rock fishing cleats for what, $30, $40 at
$30, yeah, $25, $30, yeah, next to nothing. Like, it just and
they'll save your life.
It blows me away. For the things you see, it's
absolutely
can be interesting.
Yeah. You talked a bit about printing your work and displaying your work. why do you do that? What do you get out of that? And what tips would you have for somebody to prep an image for printing and get set up for printing?
Yeah, just do it would be my advice. This is a topic I'm quite passionate about, because I just think sooner or later, if you get into this hobby and you start investing in camera systems and things like that, I think you've got to reach a point where you've got to start asking yourself why.
Yeah.
What are you doing with these images? Because I don't shoot for social media. I don't shoot for digital media. I shoot for printing. So ultimately, whatever I share online is something that I've looked at and thought, geez, I wouldn't mind printing that.
Yep.
I'm a bit old school and analog in that I think nothing beats the printed image. Nothing beats something you can tangibly hold in your hand, whether it's a book or an A4 size print, or whether it's something a meter wide that you can put up on a wall and stand back and take in. I think it's the ultimate form of backup, really. So I've always loved that printed image that's shows a moment in time, something you created personally.
Yeah.
So something I got into very early on, with my first SLR, I had a little inkjet printer, and I used to buy some photographic paper and print it out, and the colors would be wrong, and it'd be too dark or it'd be too light and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
And look,
you run out of ink halfway through the print.
Or you run out of ink halfway. Yeah, been there, done that.
I've done that a few times.
It is. But look, it is a bit of a black art once you start investigating printing and preparing images for print, stuff like that. But having said that, I don't think printing's ever been easier. If you want to get some
now,
prints,
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to get some prints done, there's 1,000 websites out there that you can upload your images to,
and comparably cheap.
Absolutely. And that a lot of printers, there's quite a few printing companies all over Australia. I personally use a mob in Melbourne called New Lab.
Yep.
They've been around for a very, very long time. But they have the option to, color correct your images. So you can upload them and they will do it for you. And, you get your image back and it's professionally printed. It's done very, very cheaply. And I've done everything from that, sort of A3 size prints through those guys. And I've done canvas prints. I've done simple canvas prints through people like Ted's Cameras,
Yeah.
couple of $100 for something that's almost a meter wide on canvas, and it's beautiful print quality.
Yeah. You can even do it through Big W.
Yeah, most definitely.
Somebody you don't really associate with photography brands,
No, but I think a lot of these companies over the years have realised that people want a decent, quality product, and they've upped their game and invested a bit in their printing technology and paper and stock and stuff like that. So, I think it runs the full gamut these days of people that want to print some small 4x6s for some family snaps, all the way up to fine art photographers who want to put something serious on the wall. So I'm a big believer in printing your own work and hanging your own work. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything terribly narcissistic about it. I think
I've got plenty of stuff on my walls, and
I've run out of wall space. In fact, I've got to the point where I rotate images now, because I sort of put something up on the wall for 6 months and then I take it down and put something else up.
I've actually got a couple of frames sitting over there. They're actually one of the first couple of panos that I shot and printed and then got framed. So these are sort of like meter long print space inside the frame, with probably about a 30 mil border around them, and they're just sort of sitting there waiting for me to get off my backside and roll out another print that I can stick in them. But
absolutely.
I think actually this room is the only one that I don't have one of my prints in.
you better get on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I just think, yeah, I mean, I don't know how much money I've now spent on camera gear, but it's a significant amount. And I just think, once you get to that point where you're investing in a bit of serious glass and you've gone to a full frame body or, a pro body or something like that, then what are you doing with all this imagery? Because, digital photography, you can create tens of thousands of images every single year. And if all it's doing is sitting on a hard drive, and sitting on Instagram server, why?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean.
I now, and the other thing I don't, and I'm a little bit lazy, so I realized years ago that the other thing I can do with my work is give it away to family and friends. So every single year for Christmas, I'm sorted for gifts. I do calendars. I do, standalone prints for people who I think might like, something that relates to their local area and stuff like that. So it's the easiest thing in the world to do. And it's something very personal that, people connect with. So
absolutely,
I do calendars every year for my entire family, which they now hassle me about. Sort of around November, I start getting reminders about, have you done the calendar for Christmas? And what are you putting in the calendar this year? They're all art critics now. I get a critique.
You should send them a bunch of QR codes this year.
Yeah, exactly right. Not quite the same. So, and as I said, I do an annual photo book every year, and I go through my photo books several times a year. It's a great way to review and remind yourself where you've been and what you've shot and stuff like that. And then I create for holidays and things like that. I create photo books for those as well. So I just adore it. I love the printed image. I just think it's just something I think everybody should embrace and really get into. And this is what led me on to participating in exhibitions. So I do the yearly arts trial. So every year I go out, and throughout the year I start curating, thinking about what might work. And so I've shot a lot of my local area down on the harbour and things like that. And that obviously I sell those every single year. There's always someone that obviously connects with it because they live in the area as well. And I've been involved with the IGAP crew, the Independent Gallery for Australian Photographers, Tom and Ibby and those guys. I've done a few exhibitions with them now, and that's a fantastic way of dipping your toe into that pond if you're so inclined. I really encourage people.
It's got a really good community feel to it too.
Well and truly. They're fantastic quality prints, and I just think if you've never done it before, until you walk into that room and you look up and you see your work hanging on a wall with your name underneath it, nothing beats that. I don't think it's just such a buzz.
So. Well, with other really good photographers as well, their work as well.
Well and truly.
And I mean, they give prizes and that sort of thing. But the nice thing is, it's not about necessarily comparing who's his best and whatever. It's actually, as I say, got that community feel about, all right, we're all here sharing and showing our work, and everyone's, usually quite supportive of one another, I think.
Absolutely. And it's fantastic having that. You have those discussions with other photographers about their work, and they ask you about yours and all that sort of stuff. And I think at the end of the day, that's what it's really all about. It's one of those quandaries about photography, I find, that at the end of the day, it's a completely individual pursuit, but there's some fantastic communities that have formed around it. So I think it's a great way of meeting people and exchanging ideas and just having those spinning the war stories about your best and your worst shoot and things like that. It's quite interesting, because at the end of the day, when you created that image, you were standing there by yourself.
That's
just sitting behind
thinking your own thoughts and concentrating on what you were doing.
Yeah, that's right. And then the end state is you're standing in a crowded room looking at it on the wall, having discussions with other people. So it's all part of the journey.
I agree. I don't think there's anything better than that. It's fantastic.
Yeah, well and truly.
So speaking about walls, have you ever hit a creative wall, and how did you handle that?
Not really. I'm gonna make people roll their eyes at this, but I've been extraordinarily lucky in that I don't think I've ever been in a rut or really hit any sort of major wall. I've put it this way: I've never reached the point where I've woken up on a Saturday morning and thought, I just can't be bothered. I've never really had that thought. I've always thought it's been no issue whatsoever, even on really crappy mornings. Like I've done shoots down on the South Coast where it's literally bucketed rain the entire drive down there. I stood under an umbrella for like an hour, waiting for a break in the rain just to get a couple of frames and stuff like that. But I still think it's worth it. I still love getting out and just standing there and, waiting to see what's going to happen. So, and I still have the same passion for landscape photography I've always had. It's just something it's part of my DNA these days. It's just something I love doing. So I've been well and truly lucky in that regard, because I know plenty of people that have hit the wall and, taken a break or, shifted genres and things like that and have come back later on. So I think it's tough, no doubt about it. And it can be hard motivating yourself, and especially if you've been shooting for a while and you've been to most of the locations and maybe you just want something new.
Well, they're probably those people that reckon there's nowhere else to shoot in Sydney now. So
yeah, exactly right.
They're the ones that get on the plane. I like what Chris Parry said in episode 2 of the podcast, where you to be a landscape photographer, particularly seascapes, you got to be an optimist, because you got to get out there and say, yeah, I'm going to get something, even if the conditions don't look right.
Yeah. One of my most favorite things in the world is after you do nail a particular location, or you get a spectacular sky or something like that, I love the post-shoot FOMO messages you get from people who, after you've posted something and they go, oh, I should have got up.
Yeah, I should have got up.
I wish I'd gotten up. And I thought it was raining, so I stayed in bed. It's like, what? So yeah, that's kind of, I love that buzz. It's just hilarious, because I just think, well, you know what? You didn't have to turn the alarm off.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And the thing is, the only shoots you're really going to be disappointed by are the ones you don't take, I think.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of just I was taught a management principle many years ago, and it goes under the acronym of Goya. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
I have heard that, yeah.
Yeah, GOYA, get off your ass. So it's what it boils down to. You just got to get out of bed, get in the car and get out there. And
absolutely,
you just never know. The conversations you have with people that, I live in Sydney. I woke up and it was raining, and it's like, yeah, but if you'd driven an hour down the coast, it was perfectly clear and you got all this great light. So,
but even if it is raining, I mean, unless it's a 100% concrete grey sky, if there's a bit of breeze about and it's passing showers, some of those conditions are the best, because the light that you can get out of that is just absolutely fantastic.
Particularly if there's a good swell rainy skies. Yeah, for that reason, because rainy skies, you get that beautiful diffused light, especially after the sun's just got above the horizon. It's just stunning. So
I think you get it peeking through and around the cracks in the cloud, glowing up behind a rain shower.
It's stunning.
Nothing better. Better.
Exactly right. It's stormy skies. Sometimes it's just the best light and the best skies you'll ever get. So, I think one of those common misunderstandings is if you don't know much about weather and climate and things like that, people tend to just see a rain forecast and think, it's going to rain tomorrow. Well, I'll just stay at home. Yeah, it's like, it's not exactly how it works.
No.
and And again, it's Sydney. We're so unbelievably spoiled. It's such a temperate climate here that, you know, we don't get a lot of rain in Sydney. So it's quite rare that you're going to get a completely socked out day where you just won't be able to leave the house. Like, it's so
But
rare.
even if it is, I mean, in Sydney, you know, you can go if it is raining and it is a concrete grey sky and, you know, showers and whatever. Go and find a waterfall.
Absolutely. Rain means waterfalls.
That's right, because there's only a couple of hundred of them within, you know, an hour and a half's drive.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So true. So true.
Yeah, I do get astounded if anyone says, no, I haven't got anything to shoot. There's, you know, it doesn't matter the conditions. There is something that you can shoot. Probably, always. You know, yeah, midnight, pitch black, dark, and fog, you're not going to get much. Fair enough. Because you can't do astro, you can't do, you know, but you actually thinking about it, I've seen some interesting foggy nightscape shots with, you know, interesting lights. You know, you find an isolated patch of light somewhere with darkness all around it. You know, you can do some fantastic things even then. So absolutely, even then there's something to shoot. Yeah.
I've been known to drive out to Richmond for chasing fog.
Yep.
And one of my favorite images I've ever shot out at Richmond was actually of a bus stop, because it was the only thing I could make out in the fog. It was so dense. Yeah. And I actually had stopped the car because it was so thick. And I looked across the road and here's this bus stop and it's just got the two lights coming into the shelter and that's all you could see. And I literally just grabbed the camera, ran across the road because I had a wide angle on. But I love it because it's so isolated. It looks unbelievably spooky in mono. So, yeah, absolutely. There's always something you can find. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So when we get out of lockdown, what's the plan? Are you got a project that you're cooking up, or are you just going to go out and shoot like you always have been?
I do have a project in the back of my mind.
But it's a secret, you don't have to tell us, but you know.
No, it's in its very embryonic stages at the moment. It's a potential. I'm thinking about publishing a photo book. It's very early stages at the moment, so I won't go into too much detail. But other than that, mate, I'm very keen to completely delete my list of, you know, locations that got skies and just start from scratch again and just shoot everything and just start up, went into the coast and just work my way down. So yeah, I'm so keen to shoot. I went for a walk the other night down to my local ferry wharf with my camera, obviously all masked up with my better half, just to watch the sunset. And I took a couple of handheld shots just of the wharf, and there was a little bit of colour in the sky. It was all very nice. But I said to my wife, I said, it just doesn't feel the same without, you know, setting up a tripod and, you know, getting out a remote and putting some filters on and you know, dragging those clouds across the sky and stuff like that. So, it didn't quite feel the same. So I'm itching to get back to the coast and, you know, get up at stupid o'clock and feel that water on my feet. So, yeah.
Definitely. So what do you like to do when you're not out shooting?
If I'm not editing, I'm a bit of a reader, a bit of a movie watcher, and obviously just hanging out with my better half and nice. You know, living life and recovering from work and stuff like that. So and generally, you know, come Thursday, I'm starting to plan what's going to happen on the weekend as far as shooting goes. So that's kind of my routine.
Very familiar. All right. I'll ask you this. I know you didn't come up with too many names about sort of inspirational. Is there any photographers out there that you think, you know, would be worthwhile me talking to on the podcast?
Because we've kind of already had this conversation where everyone I suggested you'd already spoken to. So I'll take that question on notice, I think, and I'll have another think, and I might send you a list later
you
on.
can send me a list later. I mean, I have got a long list.
I'm sure you do.
You know,
so
the thing is,
yeah,
I don't want to crowd everybody into the first month.
well, this is the thing about Sydney, though. Just talking locally, it's such a big community here. So
yeah,
you're going to have a pretty long list of just talking to locals. You're going to have a lot of names to choose from.
Yeah.
So
well, I'm trying to spread the net wide, and that's one of the reasons why I named the podcast the way that I did, with the world in it, and coming up. Actually, by this time, I probably will have released at least one or two international guests, but I've got a few more coming up that I'll be recording in the next few weeks and next month. So I'm not going to restrict myself to Sydney, and I'm not going to restrict myself to Australia. I'm trying to spread the net as far and wide as I can. I'm also trying not to just go for people with large followings or the bigger names out there. I want a few of those, obviously, because A, they're interesting to talk to, but B, they can also spread the word. But I mean, I've got people on my list with very small followings in Instagram, of only 500, 600, 800 people, but their work is absolutely on point.
Quite often they're the best accounts to follow. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And for me, it is about finding those sort of lesser known people as well that are doing absolutely amazing work, and seeing if they'll talk to me, and if they do, great. If they don't, that's great too. I'm not going to get too precious if somebody doesn't get back to me and say they want to talk to me. I don't want to talk to me sometimes.
You're not that bad, Grant.
No, I try not to be. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you. Oh, actually, there is one more question that I've got to ask, which
the most important one.
The most important one, and everybody knows what this is going to be: violet crumble or crunchy?
Oh, violet crumble! How dare you mention crunchy in the same sentence as violet crumble? Blasphemy! It's funny you asked that, because I literally just recently I did a care package exchange with someone in America, and we did an exchange of local treats.
Yep.
So they sent some American.
So you got Hershey's and all that
and stuff like that.
Stuff. Yeah.
I sent over some Tim Tams, and I sent over a violet crumble, and I told them, I said, make sure this is the last thing you eat.
Yeah.
And I got a message from them saying, that was the most sensational thing I've ever eaten. I said, well, unfortunately, you can't get them in the States, but I'm happy to, send them over on commission. But
they're an interesting
crumble all the way.
Fair enough. Well, I do have the other most important question. I thought I'd mix it up. Serena Jackson gave me that one. Pineapple on pizza.
Oh, that's a two-part answer. Yes. Until you go to Italy and eat pizza in Italy.
Yeah, no, I'm behind you.
And then you realize how blasphemous it actually is. But yeah, I don't mind pineapple on pizza. I'm not a purist.
Good eye. All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time, Glenn. It's been an absolute joy talking to you, and
thanks, mate.
Really enjoyed catching up with you. We'll have to get out shooting again at some point.
Absolutely.
It's been a while, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Absolutely. Fingers crossed, mate. Thanks very much for having me on. It's been fantastic.
Not a problem. Where can people find your work?
Okay. Well, I have to explain the bizarre name for my my Instagram page. So if people look for Aegir Photography on Instagram, that's Aegir Photography, or just search my name, Glenn Crouch, on Instagram. You'll find me. And I've got a website with my portfolio on it, which is aegirphotography.com.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks again, mate.
Thanks, mate. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening, because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work and this podcast at grantswinburnephotography.com. I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Grant Swinburne and hope to see you out shooting soon.